Imagine a kingdom where the people had turned away from the one true God, where false gods were celebrated more openly than the Creator who had given them life. This was Israel during the reign of King Ahab, a time when idolatry had seeped into every corner of society. Temples dedicated to Baal, the god of rain and fertility, were built in cities, and the voices of prophets calling the people back to God were drowned out by the clamor of false worship. The nation teetered on the edge of moral and spiritual collapse, and it seemed that hope was slipping away with each passing day. Amid this backdrop of corruption and fear, God raised up a man who would challenge the very foundation of the kingdom's spiritual life. His name was Elijah, a prophet from Tishbe in Gilead. From the moment he appeared on the scene, Elijah's presence was unmistakable, not because of grandeur or power, but because of the boldness and unwavering faith with which he spoke God's truth. He declared to King Ahab that there would be neither dew nor rain except at his word, a statement that shook the king and the people to their core. This was not just a prophecy about weather. It was a declaration that God's power and authority could not be rivaled, even by the most popular idols or the most powerful rulers. Elijah's mission was dangerous. Opposing the king and confronting the widespread worship of Baal was no small task. And yet he stood with courage, fully aware that his life could be at risk at any moment. His story reminds us that true faith often requires boldness, the willingness to stand for truth even when it is unpopular, even when the world seems to be against you. Every step Elijah took was guided by God's providence, and every act, from his miraculous sustenance to the confrontations he faced, served as a testament to the unwavering power of God. As we follow Elijah's journey, we will witness moments of incredible miracles, heart-stopping confrontations, and lessons that remain relevant today. His life challenges us to examine our own faith, to ask ourselves whether we are willing to stand for what is right, and to trust in a power greater than our circumstances. Through every trial, Elijah demonstrates that obedience to God brings not only guidance and protection, but also the opportunity to impact the world around us in profound ways. Join us as we explore the extraordinary life of Elijah the prophet, who dared to confront kings, defy false, and show a nation the true power of the living God. If this story inspires you and deepens your faith, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of these incredible Bible stories. Share this journey with your friends and family, and let the lessons of courage, faith, and divine purpose inspire everyone you know. Elijah's story is more than history. It is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, God's light shines through those who are willing to stand firm in faith. Stay with us as we uncover the miracles, the challenges, and the legacy of one of the most remarkable prophets in the Bible. After declaring God's authority over the land and challenging King Ahab, Elijah's journey led him into the wilderness, a place of solitude and danger where survival seemed uncertain. Yet it was here that God's providence revealed itself in astonishing ways. As he wandered through desolate terrain, the prophet was met not with despair but with divine provision, a reminder that faithfulness to God carries its own reward. Ravens, those creatures often overlooked by the people, became instruments of sustenance, bringing bread and meat morning and evening to Elijah as he drank from the brook nearby. This extraordinary provision was more than mere survival, it was a living testament to God's ability to care for those who trust in Him. A demonstration that the natural world itself could become a conduit for divine blessing when obedience aligns with faith. Yet God's plan extended beyond the wilderness, guiding Elijah to the town of Zarephath in the region of Sidon, far from the familiar borders of Israel, into a place where the faithful God could be revealed to the outsiders as well as the nation of Israel. There, he encountered a widow, her life marked by poverty and desperation, clinging to the last handful of flour and the last drop of oil in her home, unsure how she could survive even one more day. The encounter could have been a moment of despair. Yet Elijah's words were filled with authority and faith. He asked her to first prepare a small meal for him, promising that the jar of flour would not be spent and the jug of oil would not run dry. In that simple yet profound act of obedience, the widow chose trust over fear, and her life became intertwined with the unfolding miracles of God. Each meal she prepared nourished not only Elijah but also herself and her son, sustaining them through the famine that gripped the land and demonstrating that divine provision often comes in ways that defy human logic. The story did not end with mere survival, for tragedy soon struck, testing the faith of the widow and the courage of Elijah alike. Her son fell gravely ill and died, plunging the household into grief and despair. In that moment of utter helplessness, Elijah's role as God's messenger became even more apparent. Carrying the lifeless child to the upper room, Elijah prayed earnestly, stretching himself upon the boy and invoking the power of the living God. Through this act of faith and supplication, God's power transcended the boundaries of life and death, and the boy was restored, his eyes opening to the world once more. The widow, who had already witnessed daily provision against impossible odds, now encountered a miracle that confirmed the God of Israel as both powerful and compassionate, able to intervene even in the most hopeless circumstances. Her declaration that Elijah was truly a man of God echoed far beyond that small home, a testimony that God's care is universal, reaching across national and cultural lines to touch the lives of those who are willing to trust him. This period of Elijah's ministry, marked by both extraordinary provision and miraculous restoration, offered lessons that remain compelling for all who hear his story. It illustrated that God's care is both practical and miraculous, sustaining his servants in ways that nurture faith and inspire courage. Each raven that delivered sustenance, each meal prepared from an unending supply, and the resurrection of a young boy all pointed to a God who sees the needs of his people and acts decisively on their behalf. For Elijah, these experiences were more than demonstrations of power. They were constant reminders of the divine presence guiding every step, affirming that obedience, even in times of uncertainty and danger, would be met with protection and provision. For the widow, a foreigner in the eyes of Israel, these miracles transformed her understanding of God, revealing that faith could transcend social, economic, and geographic boundaries, bringing life, hope, and reassurance in the midst of adversity. As we reflect on this part of Elijah's journey, the narrative serves not only as a record of miraculous events, but as an enduring message about trust, courage, and divine fidelity. The intertwining of human need and divine intervention illustrates a profound truth, that when individuals step out in faith, even in the face of scarcity, God's power can create abundance where none existed, restore what seems lost, and cultivate unwavering belief in his sovereignty. Through the wilderness sojourn, the sustenance provided by nature itself, and the life-giving miracle performed for the widow's son, Elijah's story becomes a vivid illustration of God's intimate care for those who follow him, highlighting a pattern of provision, protection, and miraculous intervention that would echo throughout the prophetic ministry and beyond. In weaving these events into a seamless story, it becomes clear that Elijah's journey is not merely historical or symbolic. It is a narrative rich with lessons about faith in action, the prophet's unwavering trust, the widow's courageous obedience, and the miraculous outcome of her son's resurrection collectively reveal a God who operates both through ordinary means and extraordinary miracles. It reminds us that faith is never passive. It is a deliberate choice to act in alignment with divine instruction, to trust in unseen provision, and to recognize that the extraordinary can unfold through ordinary circumstances when guided by God's power. This chapter in Elijah's life bridges the gap between human vulnerability and divine omnipotence, demonstrating that faithfulness is rewarded, miracles are real, and God's care is both intimate and far-reaching, capable of transforming the most desperate situations into stories of hope. Sustenance. and renewal that continue to inspire believers to this day. The time came when Elijah, strengthened by God through his experiences in the wilderness and at Zarephath, faced the greatest test of his prophetic mission, a confrontation that would determine the hearts of an entire nation and reveal the futility of false worship once and for all. Word had spread of his bold proclamation against King Ahab and the prophets of Baal, and the stage was set on Mount Carmel, a place where heaven seemed closer and where the spiritual battle for Israel's loyalty would be most visible. The people gathered, their eyes filled with anticipation and uncertainty, while 450 prophets of Baal assembled on the other side, confident in their God's supposed power and eager to defend their influence over the nation. It was a moment heavy with tension, a dramatic intersection of faith, courage, and divine authority that would change Israel forever. Elijah stepped forward, his presence calm yet commanding, and addressed the crowd with a question that cuts straight to the heart of their wavering faith. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. The silence that followed was deafening, a collective pause that exposed the spiritual confusion and moral drift of the people who had for so long strayed from God's ways. In that silence, the weight of the moment pressed upon every individual present, highlighting the seriousness of the choice before them. The prophets of Baal, perhaps sensing their own insecurities beneath their bravado, prepared their altar, calling upon their God with frantic cries, dancing, and self-inflicted wounds in a desperate attempt to elicit a response. Their display, wild and chaotic, revealed not strength but the emptiness of their worship, a stark contrast to the quiet confidence of Elijah, whose faith did not rely on theatrics but on the certainty of God's power. As the day wore on and the cries of the prophets grew more intense without any answer, Elijah began to speak, not in anger, but in sharp, pointed mockery that revealed the absurdity of their beliefs. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." His words were piercing, a mix of sarcasm and prophetic insight, showing the people that Baal's so-called power was nothing more than illusion, a human creation incapable of delivering life or demonstrating authority. The crowd watched as Elijah's calm composure stood in stark contrast to the frenzy around him, illustrating that true divine power does not need to scream or demand attention. It simply is. When it came time for Elisha to act, the simplicity of his approach highlighted the majesty of God. He repaired the altar of the Lord, using 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and arranged the wood and sacrifice in preparation. What followed was not complicated or ornate. Elijah called upon God with a prayer that was simple yet filled with profound faith. "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord. Answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." The prayer, uttered with humility and confidence, reflected a heart fully devoted to God and a trust that was absolute, unshaken by the presence of powerful kings or false prophets. Then came the miracle that would forever mark Mount Carmel in Israel's history. Fire fell from heaven, consuming not only the sacrifice but the wood, the stones, and even the water that had been poured over the altar, leaving no doubt in the minds of the witnesses that the Lord was the true God. The people, awestruck and humbled, recognized the power that had been present all along and felt the weight of their own unfaithfulness. This public demonstration was more than spectacle. It was a spiritual reckoning, a moment when hearts were confronted with truth in a way that could not be ignored or denied. The undeniable presence of God through this act revealed the stark contrast between the living God who provides, sustains, and acts in accordance with His will, and the impotent deities of human invention. In the aftermath, Elijah's actions extended beyond the miraculous fire. Understanding that the people needed guidance and a clear path forward, he acted decisively to remove the false prophets, demonstrating that obedience to God requires confronting falsehood and standing for truth, even when it challenges established power structures. His courage and faith were not only a statement of divine authority, but also an example for the nation to follow, teaching that loyalty to God is active and courageous, not passive or indifferent. The event on Mount Carmel became a turning point, a narrative that echoed throughout Israel, reinforcing the idea that God's power is unmatched, that faith carries consequences and rewards, and that obedience aligned with divine instruction transforms not only the individual but the entire community. This story, woven into the larger tapestry of Elijah's life, highlights the interconnectedness of his journey, from the wilderness where he was sustained by ravens, to Zarephath where he witnessed God's provision and performed a resurrection, and now on Mount Carmel. Each episode builds upon the last, demonstrating a consistent theme. God is faithful, powerful, and deeply involved in the lives of those who follow Him. Elijah's courage, faith, and unwavering commitment to God's message serve as enduring lessons for all generations, reminding us that standing for truth may demand bold action, but it ultimately reveals God's glory and strengthens the hearts of those who witness it. Through this dramatic confrontation, the people of Israel and by extension, we today are called to recognize that true faith requires trust, courage, and a willingness to acknowledge God as the ultimate authority in every aspect of life, inspiring all who hear the story to stand firm and live with integrity, faith, and hope. Even after the dramatic victory on Mount Carmel, when fire had consumed the altar and the people of Israel had witnessed God's undeniable power, Elijah's journey was far from over, and the prophet himself faced challenges that went beyond physical danger or public opposition. In the aftermath of that awe-inspiring confrontation, news of his actions reached Queen Jezebel, the formidable and vengeful wife of King Ahab, whose heart remained hardened by idolatry and power. Consumed with fury at the death of her prophets and determined to eliminate the one who had dared to defy her authority, she sent a chilling message to Elijah, promising retribution by the next day. Fear gripped him, and even a man of such extraordinary faith was not immune to the natural human response to threats of violence. In the solitude of the wilderness, away from the eyes of kings and crowds, Elijah experienced the weight of despair, feeling isolated and questioning his own mission, as if the immense burden of spiritual leadership and the hostility of those in power were too much to bear. He fled, traveling long distances into the wilderness, seeking not just safety but a sense of purpose and reassurance. Arriving at a desolate place where he could confront his emotions and wrestle with the enormity of his calling. There, he lay beneath a broom tree, exhausted in body and spirit, openly expressing his desire to surrender, to cease, to be relieved of the overwhelming responsibility he carried. "I have had enough, Lord," he confessed. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." In this moment of vulnerability, Elijah's humanity shone through, reminding all who hear his story that even the most faithful servants of God encounter fear, fatigue, and moments of doubt. The prophet's honesty in his despair highlights a timeless truth. Faith is not the absence of struggle or uncertainty, but the willingness to continue despite it. God's response, however, was neither judgment nor rebuke, but gentle, practical, and profoundly nurturing, revealing that divine care often manifests in subtle, unexpected ways. An angel appeared to Elijah, providing food and water, simple sustenance that restored his strength for the journey ahead. This act of tender provision was a reminder that God attends to both the spiritual and the physical needs of his servants, supplying the necessary resources to persevere even when circumstances seem impossible. Elijah's brief nourishment was accompanied by quiet encouragement, showing that divine intervention does not always come in the form of dramatic displays or miracles, but often through small, sustaining gestures that allow one to continue on the path set before them. Rejuvenated by this encounter, Elijah embarked on a 40-day journey to Mount Horeb, a sacred place where the Lord's presence would reveal itself in ways that defied expectations. The journey itself, arduous and demanding, mirrored the inner struggle of the prophet as he sought clarity and understanding. Upon reaching the mountain, Elijah took refuge in a cave, a place of silence and isolation, waiting for God's guidance. It was here, in this stillness, that the Lord taught a lesson that would profoundly shape Elijah's understanding of divine power. The manifestations of God's presence are not always found in wind, earthquake, or fire, no matter how impressive or terrifying those forces may seem. Instead, the Lord revealed himself in a gentle whisper, a subtle and quiet voice that required attention, patience, and sensitivity to perceive. This revelation challenged Elijah's expectations, showing him that God's work is not always carried out in grandiose displays but often through calm, persistent, and almost imperceptible means that shape hearts, guide decisions, and transform lives in ways that are far-reaching and enduring. Through this experience, Elijah learned that true spiritual leadership involves recognizing and responding to both the extraordinary and the subtle workings of God, that faithfulness is cultivated not only in moments of triumph but also in periods of quiet reflection, and that God's presence is often most evident in ways that require discernment and humility. The angel's care and the whisper on Mount Horeb became pivotal lessons for the prophet, teaching him resilience, the value of subtle divine guidance, and the importance of inner strength rooted in trust. They revealed that even when fear and despair threaten to overwhelm, the quiet assurance of God's attention and care can sustain, restore, and prepare one to continue the mission entrusted to them. This period of Elijah's life underscores a profound continuity in his journey, from the wilderness where he was fed by ravens and sustained through the widow's endless flour and oil, to Mount Carmel where God's fire revealed his supremacy over false gods. Elijah's experiences weave together a narrative of obedience, faith, and divine fidelity. Now, in his moment of despair, the lessons of subtle, quiet divine presence complement the earlier demonstrations of power, illustrating that God equips his servants not only through miraculous interventions, but also through gentle, restorative care that renews courage, clarifies purpose, and strengthens resolve. These experiences remind us that leadership, faith, and perseverance require both moments of bold action and periods of patient reflection, and that God's guidance can be found in both the extraordinary and the ordinary. By the time Elijah emerged from the cave, he was renewed in spirit, prepared to continue his mission with a deeper understanding of the diverse ways God works in the world. His journey teaches that even the strongest among us need replenishment, that divine presence may speak in silence rather than spectacle, and that moments of despair are not signs of failure but opportunities for God's sustaining power to manifest in ways that are both practical and profound. Elijah's story in this phase of his life challenges us to embrace both the dramatic and the subtle, to recognize God's care in all forms, and to find courage in knowing that even in our most vulnerable moments, we are never truly alone. As Elijah's journey continued, marked by both miraculous provision in the wilderness and dramatic confrontation on Mount Carmel, the prophet began to turn his attention to the future, understanding that his work, though extraordinary, was part of a larger divine plan that required continuity beyond his own ministry. The God who had sustained him with ravens, provided through the widow of Zarephath, and demonstrated his supremacy through fire on the altar, now called Elijah to invest in the next generation, recognizing that the lasting impact of his mission depended on preparing others to carry the mantle of prophetic leadership. In this pivotal moment, Elijah's focus shifted from individual miracles and confrontations to mentorship, the cultivation of wisdom, courage, and faith in those who would continue God's work after him, exemplifying a principle as relevant today as it was in ancient Israel: the responsibility to nurture and guide those who follow, ensuring that divine purpose is carried forward with integrity and devotion. Elijah found Elisha, a man whose heart and spirit resonated with God's calling, and through a deeply symbolic act, he began the process of transferring authority and responsibility. By casting his prophetic cloak over Elisha, Elijah was not merely performing a ritual. He was conveying a tangible sign of God's empowerment, a visible and sacred symbol of the continuity of divine mission. The cloak, worn by the prophet as an emblem of authority and spiritual anointing, became the medium through which the mantle of leadership and divine calling was passed, illustrating that God's work transcends individual lifetimes and must be sustained through careful preparation of those who will inherit it. Elisha's acceptance of this symbol was more than obedience; it was an acknowledgement of God's sovereignty, a willingness to embrace a calling that required sacrifice, faith, and courage. By leaving behind the familiar life of tending oxen and plowing fields, by slaughtering the oxen and burning the equipment as recorded in the scriptures, Elisha demonstrated total commitment, severing ties with his former existence to dedicate himself fully to the prophetic mission. This act of surrender and dedication reflected the seriousness and depth of spiritual calling, reinforcing the principle that divine work requires not only faith and courage but also the readiness to leave behind the ordinary for the extraordinary purposes God ordains. The mentoring relationship between Elijah and Elisha also highlights the subtle yet profound ways in which God prepares his servants for future challenges. Elijah, seasoned by trials, miraculous encounters, and direct confrontations with kings and false prophets, became a living example of obedience, courage, and discernment. Through shared experiences, Elisha observed the practical realities of ministry, the necessity of trusting God in times of scarcity and danger, and the spiritual discipline required to confront societal idolatry and moral compromise. These lessons, imparted not just through words but through action, created a deep, experiential understanding in Elisha that could not be achieved through theory alone. In this sense, mentorship served as both transmission of knowledge and shaping of character, a process in which the mentee absorbs not only the techniques of spiritual leadership, but also the essence of faith lived in alignment with God's will. Their journey together also symbolized the continuity of God's purpose across generations, from the wilderness provision to Mount Carmel's fiery demonstration. Elijah's ministry had been marked by moments of visible divine intervention, dramatic displays of God's power, and intimate lessons of trust and perseverance. By mentoring Elisha, Elijah ensured that these lessons would not be lost, that the knowledge of God's faithfulness and the courage to act upon it would be instilled in someone who would continue to influence the nation. The transfer of prophetic authority was a deliberate act of foresight, emphasizing that leadership in God's kingdom is not about personal glory but about cultivating successors who can expand the work and extend its impact. Elisha's response, asking for a double portion of Elijah's spirit, was not a demand for personal power but a recognition of the spiritual preparation necessary to meet the challenges ahead and a commitment to serve with the same devotion and boldness exemplified by his mentor. In their final moments together, Elijah guided Elisha through the realities of ministry, preparing him for the inevitable separation and the continuation of God's work beyond his own life. The parting of the waters of the Jordan, performed with Elijah's cloak, symbolized both divine authority and the miraculous power available to those who faithfully follow God's calling. This act not only demonstrated the inheritance of spiritual authority, but also served as a tangible reminder to Elisha that God's power operates through obedience and faith, that miracles are accessible to those who walk in alignment with divine purpose, and that every generation must embrace the responsibility of sustaining and expanding God's work in their time. Through this mentorship, Elijah exemplified the integration of personal faith, divine empowerment, and strategic preparation for the future. The lessons of courage, obedience, discernment, and perseverance he imparted to Elisha created a foundation upon which the next phase of prophetic ministry could thrive. By investing in Elisha, Elijah ensured that the dramatic victories, the quiet lessons of trust, the miraculous interventions, and the moral authority he embodied would continue to influence Israel, demonstrating that God's work is enduring, cumulative, and reliant upon the faithful preparation of those who follow. This narrative thread, linking the wilderness, Mount Carmel, and the mentorship of Elisha, reveals a consistent theme throughout Elijah's life. Divine power is revealed not only through extraordinary miracles, but also through intentional preparation, the cultivation of successors, and the passing on of spiritual authority, reminding us that God's mission is timeless, intergenerational, and dependent on the faithful stewardship of those called to serve. Elijah's mentorship of Elisha, therefore, stands as one of the most compelling chapters in his story, illustrating that true leadership in God's plan combines bold action, spiritual insight, and a commitment to preparing the next generation. It underscores that divine work is not limited to spectacular miracles or moments of confrontation, but is sustained through patient guidance, intentional teaching, and the nurturing of others who will continue the mission. Through this relationship, we see the continuity of God's purposes, the importance of investing in those who will carry the torch forward, and the enduring impact of faithfulness, courage, and mentorship in the unfolding story of divine redemption. As Elijah's life reached its extraordinary climax, the narrative of his ministry transitioned from earthly struggles and victories to a dramatic, divine ascension that would forever mark the prophet's place in history. The culmination of his journey was witnessed by his devoted successor, Elisha, who had absorbed years of mentorship, guidance, and first-hand experience of God's power. Together, they had traveled the land, confronted kings, challenged idolatry, and witnessed miracles that displayed both the awe-inspiring might of God and the quiet, sustaining presence that nurtures faith in times of despair. Yet, it was in this final moment that the profound significance of Elijah's life and mission was fully revealed. The chariot of fire and the whirlwind that separated him from the earth were not merely dramatic spectacles, but powerful symbols of divine authority, heavenly reward, and the continuity of God's plan. Elisha's reaction to witnessing Elijah's departure was deeply human and deeply spiritual, a mixture of grief and recognition of responsibility. The tearing of his garments, a traditional expression of mourning and reverence, reflected the emotional weight of losing a mentor and spiritual father while simultaneously acknowledging the greatness of the moment he had just witnessed. The fiery chariot and horses of fire served as a visible demonstration of God's glory, power, and validation of Elijah's faithfulness, and they reminded Elisha and through him, all of Israel that God's promises are true, His power is absolute, and those who are faithful to His calling may witness even the most extraordinary manifestations of divine providence. Elijah's ascension also serves as a bridge between the Old Testament and the New Testament, a symbol that transcends his own time. Centuries later, his presence alongside Moses during the transfiguration of Jesus affirmed the continuity of God's redemptive plan and highlighted the prophetic fulfillment of promises across generations. His role as the forerunner, echoed in John the Baptist's ministry, reinforced the principle that faithful obedience and courage in the service of God ripple far beyond the immediate moment, influencing history and shaping the spiritual trajectory of countless lives. Through these connections, Elijah's life illustrates the enduring power of mentorship, the importance of preparing successors, and the lasting influence of a life wholly dedicated to divine purpose. The lessons of Elijah's ascension extend beyond theological symbolism to practical inspiration for believers today. His story challenges us to cultivate courage when facing moral and spiritual opposition, to maintain faith in the face of apparent defeat, and to recognize that divine intervention can manifest both in dramatic, unmistakable acts and in subtle, quiet ways that require patience and discernment. It underscores the value of investing in others, teaching, guiding, and mentoring those who will continue the work long after we are gone. Elijah's life is a masterclass in stewardship of spiritual gifts, demonstrating that the measure of influence is not only in what one accomplishes personally, but also in how one equips and empowers the next generation to carry forward the mission with fidelity and courage. Furthermore, Elijah's ascension embodies the eschatological hope that is central to both Jewish and Christian traditions. The promise of his return before the great and dreadful day of the Lord reminds believers that God's plans are ongoing, that faithfulness will always be rewarded, and that the story of redemption continues to unfold across time. His life invites reflection on our own participation in this divine narrative, how we respond to challenges, how we nurture faith and courage in ourselves and others, and how we trust in God's providence even when the path seems uncertain or perilous. The chariot of fire is not just a moment in history. It is a visual and spiritual emblem of God's unwavering presence, the ultimate reward for obedience, and the eternal perspective that frames our earthly struggles within a larger divine purpose. As we reflect on Elijah's journey from the wilderness provision by ravens and the miraculous sustenance of the widow of Zarephath, to the fiery demonstration on Mount Carmel, the quiet lessons in the cave on Mount Horeb, the mentoring of Elisha, and finally, his ascension into heaven, we see a consistent pattern of faith, courage, mentorship, and divine guidance that speaks powerfully to our own lives. His story encourages us to trust that God is in control, to act boldly when confronted with injustice or falsehood, and to embrace the responsibility of passing on wisdom, faith, and courage to those who will follow. It reminds us that even in moments of fear, despair, or uncertainty, divine provision and guidance are available, often in ways we may not immediately recognize, yet are perfectly suited to prepare us for the next step of our journey. Dear viewers, Elijah's life is a timeless testament to what God can accomplish through a servant who is fully committed, courageous, and faithful. His ascension in the fiery chariot is a vivid reminder that our actions, faith, and mentorship can have a lasting impact, inspiring generations long after our earthly ministry has ended. May his story strengthen your faith, embolden your courage, and inspire you to nurture and guide others in your life with wisdom and love. If this journey through Elijah's life has touched your heart and illuminated your path, we warmly invite you to like this video, share it with friends and family who may be inspired, and subscribe to our channel to continue exploring the remarkable truths and stories of Scripture. Your support helps us bring these lessons to life, and together, we can keep the light of faith and courage shining brightly in the world.